Hey guys, this is Joe East here. How's it going? Hey, I want to throw some ideas out there. Um, I am working on some documents to create a new country, a new United States, a new constitution, new universities, new centers of power, new money, new everything. So, in other words, scrap the system as it is, and let's start something new. And so, I guess the core thing is how do we cultivate civilization? What is civilization? What's the purpose of civilization? And throughout history, the purpose of civilization is about four words: the cultivation of great men, the cultivation of genius, the cultivation of your Isaac Newtons, guys like Isaac Newton. That's pretty much what it is on the scientific end, and on the music end is Beethoven, on the artistic end, the Michelangelos. That is the purpose of civilization. There's no other purpose. So we all say build this new America. Let's say Thomas Jefferson, those guys were putting together the USA. Well, there was a thing in the Constitution about inventions, and that was for great men. The Edisons that came eventually, the great generals. Ulysses Grant and Robert E. Lee, both sides, awesome freaking generals, the finest soldiers the world has produced. Those guys, Jeb Stuart, one side, on the other side, these guys were the greatest military geniuses. They studied Napoleon and started something new, either on top of what Napoleon did. Napoleon was probably the greatest military genius in history, aside from maybe Hannibal. So this civilization, this country that we have, or civilization in general, Western civilization is the cultivation of great men. So if we're not producing great men, we are fucking up. We are fucking up. So we got to crash it and build it again, so we can create great men. So we must build a foundation for great men, and some of this is military training. Some of it is training of the intellect. Training of this, that, what's the history of governments over the ages? What were the best? What were the worst? What's the formats that worked? What's the formats that didn't work? How long does it take for a government to crash and burn? Does it last for 300 years, 500 years, 1,000 years? How does it do it? And how do we produce the maximum amount of great men given an ideal government structure, ideal civilizational structure, which involves not just governments? Because remember, Western civilization is, roughly speaking, United States, Canada, Great Britain, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, Portugal, and the Scandinavian countries, and that's Western civilization. That's the last 500 years. Those countries produced everything with regard to Western civilization. That's where the great men came from, Western civilization. So we need to study this deeply, and what's the foundation of Western civilization, and how the next age is going to happen, where we have the similar foundations structurally, not the exact same themes of Western civilization, because the Western civilization is obviously almost crashed and burned. We live in a degenerate society of just stupidity and insanity, and right now you see it slowly, some powerful men emerging ready to crash the system and rebuild something new. And that's where you see in Italy, Great Britain, the United States, with the presidential leaders and some of the guys who are following them, will crash the system and rebuild something new. So we need to start writing draft constitutions, start writing draft university blueprints of how we're going to educate great men, and how we're going to train them as children, going through, say, a military school or through gymnastics or whatever, how to build their bodies, their characters, their brains, their artistic. All this stuff needs foundations. The Shakespeares, the Michelangelos, the Edisons, and all these guys, they didn't just pop up out of nowhere. There was a foundational civilizational ground, these soil that allowed them to grow. That structure has to be there. And if the structure's not there, we're just fucking barbarians and savages, right? So we're thinking through some of this stuff. Why has science been a pile of shit for 50, 60 years? We haven't done anything great since the landing on the moon, or what was the other thing we were doing? Uh, yeah, the invention of the semiconductor in 1940 something, and it was pushed through pretty much in the 1960s or whatever, and the computer pretty much stopped advancing in the 1990s. The internet kind of sort of started interconnecting in the late 90s. It was relatively minor, but that's the only thing that was happening is the internet came out in the late 90s. And ever since the late 90s, nothing's happened. Nothing. Yeah, we mass produced and got shit smaller, but it's doing the same shit as the internet was doing in the 1990s. Yeah, we have smartphones, but we were doing the same functions with our computers in the late 90s, and everything just got smaller, smaller and smaller. And we just got tons of more data, but it's the same shit. There's no scientific advances roughly since the late 50s, 60s, and then very slight advances on the computer end with the semiconductors, and then an interconnection, and we all figured out how to write software, and then now the software problem has been solved in the 90s. There's no new algorithms since the 1990s in software. In fact, probably the 1990s was only the implementation of the algorithms we had all thought through in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So the 90s was basically bringing it all together into a network called the internet. And here we are. We just miniaturization since then. Nothing new. So let's start thinking about our new constitution, our new civilization. What will be the great books that we must know about? Do we read Shakespeare? Do we read Schopenhauer, Descartes, all these philosophers? Who are the most important ones? Not the stupid ones, the dumbasses that we know are dumbasses now, but what about Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche? I think he has something very interesting to tell us. Schopenhauer. Where did we go wrong with some of these philosophers, the age of reason maybe was a little bit not enough spirit in the age of reason. And maybe in the age of great spirit, maybe there wasn't enough reason, right? So we need to take a look at what we accomplished since the 1500s, which was the beginning of Western civilization. Western civilization began with the Protestant Revolution with Martin Luther. Martin Luther nailed these 95 whatever theses on the church door. That was the beginning of the Protestant Revolution, which started Western civilization. So the interaction of the Protestants and the Catholics debating, that's essentially Western civilization. Now that no longer exists. So Western civilization has frozen into a nothingness starting about 1950s, 1960s, but it really slowed down after the 1880s. The 1880s was the peak of Western civilization. Great Britain controlled the world, and everybody started speaking English, and all these great inventions came in the late 1880s, and then it kind of sort of slowed down in the early 1900s. And then suddenly, catastrophe of the 20th century, the Great Wars, all kind of fucking extermination of vast quantities of human beings that's never been heard of before, or maybe hasn't been heard of in a long time. So, it's like, what's next? In the next 50 years, we need to build this, start thinking about building this foundation of what's going to emerge, say, in about the 21st century, within the lifetimes of our grandkids or great-grandkids. And what will they inherit from us? So we got to leave them the best of the best. So let's start writing constitutions. Let's start designing new universities. Let's get rid of the garbage that we have accumulated in this age of degeneracy and decadence, and start making sure that the next generation knows kind of sort of what's available. What are these tools available for what they can start building that 21st, I guess the 22nd century, what they can build on from the dying embers and ash heap of Western civilization, which again, like I said, it started in the Protestant Revolution in 1500 with Martin Luther, and it ended roughly with the First World War, from 1914 till when did it end? 1918, 1919. That's pretty much when the Western civilization stopped, and then we had some belching of the corpse, with our semiconductors and going to the moon. And that's the final gasps of Western civilization. Now we're completely dead. Nothing, airplanes still go slower now than they went in the 1960s or the 1940s. So, we got to figure this out. So we need to start writing constitutions and start building the new dream of the 22nd century, should I say. Anyway, so let me close this out. I'm traveling now, so I'm got a couple of ideas that I've just been thinking about for a few months, actually. Haven't put them all together yet. Been building some documentation on what the inheritance we need to leave as the fertile soil after we crash and burn in the West. Like I said, you're starting to see some male figures starting to take control of the system to stabilize it and then crash it and then start rebuilding something new. You're starting to see the alpha males emerging now with the Trumps here and then in the UK, Italy, and various other nations. They're slowly rising. It's a natural thing that's going to happen as a civilization crashes and burns and dies. The embers start building for the next phase, and you're going to see some very powerful alpha figures emerge to start building this new civilization, because it takes a lot of testosterone and organizational energy and, frankly, military force to build a perimeter to keep out the barbarians. So the core of this new civilization can emerge and build. Testosterone, fertility also, ladies. We just got to make sure we have plenty of kids produced in the next few generations, and they must be cultivated correctly, or cultivated with the maximum amount of tools that we can give them for the building of the 22nd century that's coming up. So, hope you guys enjoy this little chat. Take care. See you around. Go out there and kick some ass. Till next time. Bye.